This is an archive edition of Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. There are 6 million Americans living with Alzheimer's today. That's approximately 1 in 10 people 65 and older. There are other kinds of dementia as well, and all of the people who live with those diseases need care. That care is often provided by unpaid family members and loved ones, and even when professional care is involved, family members continue to provide support. This hour, we're going to talk about the challenges of caring for people with dementia. This is an experience that Kathy Good knows well. In 2003, her husband, David Good, was a district court judge living in Cedar Rapids, a vital, vibrant man. At the age of 56, he was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. Even though she was still working full-time, she also became her husband's caregiver. When he passed away in 2015, she almost immediately transitioned into helping and guiding other caregivers. She is senior director and co-founder of the Chris and Suzy DeWolf Family Innovation Center for Aging and Dementia of Mercy in Cedar Rapids. In a few minutes, Michael Wagler, Iowa State Director of the AARP, will join us as we talk about resources for caregivers, and we will take your questions this hour, so you can email talkofiowa@iowapublicradio.org. But we are going to start now with Kathy Good and her experiences. Kathy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Charity. It's lovely to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here, and I think that your personal experience is so profound, beautiful, difficult, and instructive that I think it's really important to explore it. And I want to go back before 2003. You and your husband, David, this was a second marriage for both of you, right? And in reading memorials to David, I get the sense that he was just an incredibly vibrant, energetic man, and the two of you were just dedicated to having adventures together. How do you think about David?
I think you've described him very well. He was a very vibrant, energetic, fast-paced, caring, compassionate, concerned person, and did good for all kinds of other people. You know, I think he lived out his name well in terms of he was a great volunteer in the community, and it was really, when he died, it was like another good guy gone.
Yeah. And he liked to have fun, too.
Yes.
You guys he did 20 RAGBRAIs?
Well, he did 20. I think we did 5 together on our tandem.
Wow.
And, it was an awesome experience, and I'm so glad. So every year when RAGBRAI happens, I, rethink about some of those memories that I have of his encouragement of me, because I was kind of an okay cyclist, but we got a tandem bike because then we'd always arrive at the same place at the same time, because otherwise he'd be ahead of me, and by the time I got there, he'd go like ready to go, and I go like, I just got here, Dave.
Right.
So like, give me a break.
And early in your relationship, you bought a boat. He loved to be out on the water.
Yes.
It was important that you learn to drive the boat so he could water ski.
Yes, right? Exactly. And I'm not a water person, so I, wore my life jacket a lot. And, it was amazing that we figured out a routine that we could get the boat on the trailer and off the trailer, and I could learn to drive it, and so he could ski, and it was great adventure, and it was what we were both up for.
So he was 56 years old when he was diagnosed, and still working full-time, obviously a very respected district court judge.
Yes.
What were the signs that led to his diagnosis?
Well, the first signs were kind of how I consider them to be sort of blips. And I don't think I really saw the pattern of all the blips until, his diagnosis. And it was quite clear about that there was a pattern here. So he had some personality changes. We had this bill paying process at the end of the month where now we wouldn't be doing it, writing checks the way that we did then. But he would write the check. I would get the bills ready. He would write the checks. I'd put them in the envelope. We'd go to the post office, and then we'd go to the Dairy Queen.
Nice.
And so he got to the point where he couldn't write the checks. So we knew he had some vision issues. And how it was appearing at his job was that he couldn't read the computer screen. So he went to, Wolf Clinic and got computer glasses. Well, that didn't help. And then they thought, well, maybe he had cataracts. So he had cataract surgery, and that helped some. But he was still like having trouble getting his rulings done, and he was a very responsible judge. So that worried him a lot, and so he was anxious. So I thought, well, maybe he's depressed and anxious. So he went to see a psychologist that said, I don't think he's depressed. And so it ultimately was diagnosed when he used to come home and run on the lunch hours, and I happened to be home on this Friday. And when he came back from running, he was so anxious, and he said, Kathy, I just can't go back to work. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I just can't do it. And I picked up a newspaper and said, read to me. He read the first line in a column, dropped off the last word, couldn't figure out where he was to pick it up. And I'm going like, oh my goodness, this is serious. Yeah. So I called the Wolf Clinic. So we went down to the Wolf Clinic in his running clothes because I was just like freaked out. And they did a field of vision exam and determined that in both eyes in the lower quadrants, his visual field was just not there or very reduced. And they're all kind of looking at each other and going like, I think who you need to see is Dr. Andrew Lee at the University of Iowa. He's a neuro-ophthalmologist. So, but you'll never get in because he's busy. But they called. And he had an opening at 8 o'clock that next Monday morning, which is all of this is just kind of phenomenal how it all came together. He diagnosed it STAT as the visual variant of Alzheimer's posterior cortical atrophy. So a life-changing day in June of 2003. But there'd been...
And I've never heard of this kind of Alzheimer's
it's
before
very rare.
Your story. Yeah.
It's very rare. I think that the Mayo Clinic had diagnosed... by this time, 68 cases in like 10 years or something, so it was very rare. But usually it is to someone who's younger. Okay. So anyway, all of his symptoms were visual, obviously. And so there'd been some other things, his personality change, his inability to write checks. He always set up adventures for us, and he quit setting up adventures. So there were just other kinds of signs, but they were kind of blips until the diagnosis. And I go like, okay, well, right. It was all part of the pattern.
Everything became clear.
Yeah.
What an incredible blow for both of you.
Right.
And of course, he was able to understand
yes.
this diagnosis. How did he react?
Well, I think he handled his whole diagnosis and living with dementia in such a brave way. I'm not sure I could have done it as well. So initially we had to figure out who we were going to tell and how we were going to tell. And he decided that he wanted to tell the judges himself. And so they happened to have a court day shortly after that because he went on medical leave, obviously. But he went and met with the judges and he said, write out what I have, will you? Because he was at a point where he wasn't sure he could remember what he had other than dementia.
Right.
So he did that, lived bravely. We made a decision that we were going to focus on all the things that still work because there were so many, and not to deny the things that didn't work, but we were going to accommodate to them while we were focusing on continuing to live well. So I was probably more of a mess in terms of reacting to this than he was. It was sort of like, well, this is the second coming of me, and had always been an optimistic person. So in a certain sense, he continued that optimism. And I'm an optimistic person too, so I kind of recovered, but it was a shocking blow,
And the two of you were so young. And looking forward, I'm sure,
yes.
to retirement.
Yes.
You loved adventures.
Yes.
So it was the end of so much for you, even if you could focus on the things you could still do.
Right.
And we will talk about, because I know
Yeah.
that the two of you found a lot of ways to have joy
Right.
in those years. But it also transformed your life. What were you doing at the time of this diagnosis?
So I was employed in private practice, and
In private practice, you were a social worker?
I was a social worker, yes, and been a social worker in the community for decades, and had taken early retirement from my teaching job in the Human Services program at Kirkwood Community College with the thought that I would just increase my private practice. And so I did that, and the number of clients that I saw until he was diagnosed, and then it was like, okay, well, I guess I'll reduce that number so that I can become his caregiver.
And yet you also still had to make a living, and you needed health insurance.
Yes, well, and we were fortunate because Dave took early retirement, so we had the option of some health insurance, through his job, but it halved our income. So we were still fortunate because that doesn't happen to everybody, that they, have their income and still have enough that they can do well. So I started figuring out as Dave's condition progressed and we needed more help, what our needs were. I, knew the community, so I figured out, who in the community can provide some of these things, and I would access them, fill out all of their forms, and then I formed what I called my committee. So who could come together and create as high a quality of life for Dave as was possible, and me too, because I was still working. So I put that committee together, and I used to think, how do people do this when they don't have decades of social work experience? I just don't know how they do it, and how do they do it if they don't have some resources, some financial resources? So that was just always questions in my mind as we were both grateful for all that we had, and Dave was still remained optimistic and I suppose you could say compliant. I mean, he didn't give me a lot of trouble, which is sometimes people living with dementia do with their caregivers.
Yeah. Well, we will talk more about that in a moment. And you, of course, are now guiding caregivers. So we will get a lot of advice from you, Kathy, in just a moment. But we'll also talk more about your story. We'll be back after a break. I'm talking today with Kathy Good. She is Senior Director and co-founder of the Chris and Suzy DeWolf Family Innovation Center for Aging and Dementia of Mercy. She lost her husband to Alzheimer's in 2015 and was his caregiver for 12 years. In a few minutes, Michael Wagler, Iowa State Director of the AARP, will also join us, and you can join us too with your questions and stories. This is Talk of Iowa from IPR News. You're listening to an archive edition of Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. Today, we are talking about what it's like to care for someone you love who has dementia or Alzheimer's. There are 6 million Americans living with Alzheimer's today. That's approximately 1 in 10 people 65 and older. And of course, all of those individuals need caregivers. With me right now is Kathy Good. She spent 12 years as a caregiver. Her husband, David Good, was a district court judge in Cedar Rapids when, at the age of 56 in 2003, he was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. He passed away in 2015, and at that point, she almost immediately transitioned into helping and guiding other caregivers. She is Senior Director and co-founder of the Chris and Suzy DeWolf Family Innovation Center for Aging and Dementia of Mercy. Kathy, after Dave's diagnosis, as you started looking for the resources that you needed and really transitioned into that role as his caregiver, in those early years, I know that the two of you worked really hard to continue to live life to its fullest. Can you tell me about some of the moments of joy that you and Dave were able to have in those early years?
Sure. So it was really important, as I said earlier, that we focused on all the things that still worked. So we were able to continue to bicycle. And so at some point, and bicycling was joyful for us, and because it was something that we'd always done together. So at some point when Dave was no longer to be able to be the captain on the front of the tandem because of his vision and his balance and that sort of thing. We got a quadrabent, which is a side-by-side bicycle that has 4 wheels on the ground, and so we could still bicycle. So we were just bicycling on a different kind of tandem, and it was kind of clunky, but it still kept us on the road and
Right.
on
The wind in your hair.
Yes, exactly. So we were still able, to do that. So Dave continued. He had done marathon running before his diagnosis, and afterwards he did 2 half marathons with his niece, who was at Baylor University in Waco, and part of their student health program or something. So we went to Waco, and so it was really fun to see him, excel. Continue to excel as a runner with his niece. So we had great opportunities of all being together as with his extended family. And then we had a couple that we always had traveled with, Vernon and Sally Robinson, and so we continued, and we went to France, we went to Ireland. And those were moments of joy, and we have photos and great memories in my brain. And then we're close to my brother and sister-in-law, and so they had a place in Florida, so we continued to go to Florida on a regular basis and to be with them. And so those are all things that were, in terms of active things that we did. There were also quiet moments when he was always loved NPR and IPR, and so oftentimes he would listen to that during the day while I was gone, and then when I would come home, he'd say, hey, listen what I learned today. And so those were precious moments to me in terms of, he was still engaged with life and still wanting to share that. And so those are fond memories that I have.
Of course, the disease progresses. And we'll talk about that in a moment, because even when you get used to your role as a caregiver, you get used to this stage of the disease, it changes.
Yes.
So tell me when things really changed for Dave, when some of those adventures stopped being possible, when you realized even that you needed more help.
So I used to think of, as the losses occurred, they were kind of like gut punches. And I can remember one that stands out. So we had this in our bedroom. You always had to go to the wall socket to turn off the light, and it was always his job because he slept on that side of the bed. And I remember the night that he went to turn off the light and he couldn't figure out where the switch was, So that was really a significant loss. And so it did progress, and he got to the point where he was not able to verbalize so much his ideas, and so then we would do 20 questions. And so he was very fortunate because judges would continue to come and get him for lunch, and then he'd be wanting to tell me where they went for lunch. And so we did 20 questions because he wanted to tell me and I wanted to know. So, but it wasn't, he just couldn't
remember.
He just couldn't remember, and he couldn't figure out how to say the words. So there was a lot of word finding issues.
Did he lose the ability to speak
Yes.
and communicate with you?
And I could never figure out whether or not he actually lost the ability or whether he had enough awareness to know that what he was saying didn't make any sense. It was sort of like word salad. And so, but he did. So one of the things that happened on our 25th wedding anniversary, which was a moment of joy, because he hadn't been verbal for probably 6 months, hadn't said anything. And that night I said to him, I really love you. And he said it back. So,
wow.
So that will always remain as a very fond memory. And somehow he got that out. I don't know how he did, but anyway, that was wonderful.
He also progressed to the point where you could no longer care for him at home.
Yes.
What was that like for you to realize that he needed to leave the home?
Well, it was really interesting because I probably should have had more help in the home beforehand because there was an issue over he had funky toenails, and trying to get his socks on in the morning, I'd lose it sometimes. Then I'd have to go out in the hallway and breathe and come back in and go like, I'm so sorry. Somebody said, why didn't he just go without socks? And I go like, that never occurred to me. So
every caregiver can totally relate to what you're saying there, because you run into these obstacles and it feels like you can't get through it.
So how it ended up that he went to live outside our home was that he wrenched his back and he went for rehab. And in his absence was when I realized, oh my goodness sakes, I'm going to go down the tubes before he does, because I recognized what I'd been doing, because you do things incrementally, a little at a time, and a little more, a little more, a little more, until finally you are like stressed out, stressed to the max. And I didn't get it until I wasn't so stressed out because he wasn't there. So that was really when we made the decision, I made the decision that he needed to go somewhere outside of our home to live. And that was a very stressful time, and I was very thankful because Dave's daughter Emily was in agreement with me and helped me sort of figure out and sort out where I thought was the best place for him, and that was very helpful to have her assistance. That doesn't always happen to families either, but I was very fortunate all along the caregiving journey to have such good support from my family, his family, friends. We were just blessed.
Caring for someone you love with Alzheimer's is a journey of loss. You lost parts of Dave every day, every year, every month. How did you manage your grief while you were still caring for him and dealing with these losses?
Well, there's something called ambiguous loss that Pauline Boss coined about how somebody is here but not here in the same way that they used to be. And so once I figured out about ambiguous loss and found Pauline Boss, I understood that you have to mourn the losses. You have to talk about them, you have to grieve them, you have to cry over them, and then at the same time you have to remember what you still have. And so that was a way of kind of managing or coping with the best I could with the fact of these ongoing losses, because I kept remembering I can still go give him a kiss, I can still go talk with him, I can still be with him, so we can be together at the same time that I'm going like, oh my goodness, he's not able to answer my questions anymore. Even if I do, the 20 questions, he's not comprehending exactly what I'm asking him. So the losses are ongoing and multiple. And the more that you can continue, even at the end, there still were things that still worked, even though they were minimal in nature.
He passed away in 2015.
Yes.
What was that like?
Well, quite honestly, because there'd been so many losses, it was probably, it was such a relief, okay, because sometimes I would sit in his care center room and look at him and think, Dave Good, how much longer can you continue to do this? And then I go like, and how much longer can I continue to do this? And so when he died, of course, I was grieving the loss because it was final and he was gone. But I was so relieved for him and for me and for all of the people around us who were so sad also, that we could get on to saying, so what kind of legacy can we create here in honor of Dave Good? Because this is a good guy gone, and something good, there ought to be an upside of this downside.
Kathy, that's such a brave thing to share. And I know that you take care of caregivers all the time. But so many caregivers feel that relief when they lose the person finally to the disease, but there's so much guilt connected to that. People have a really hard time admitting that.
Yes, and that's kind of why I like to talk about it, is to give people permission to feel relieved, because it is a struggle. And I don't know how it is to struggle with living with dementia, but I certainly know the struggle of watching somebody live with dementia, and it's agonizing. And so for that to be over, and you can remember the person hopefully more as they were before they were diagnosed with some form of dementia, and keep those memories alive, and then figure out, so what good can you do? What good can come from the experience that you have? And so at the Caregiver Center in Cedar Rapids, a lot of our caregivers, even while they're caregiving, share with each other, but then afterwards they become our volunteers, because they understand the importance of talking with somebody who gets it, who talks caregiver, who's had that experience.
I'm talking with Kathy Good. She gets it, for sure. Kathy Good is Senior Director and co-founder of the Chris and Suzy DeWolf Family Innovation Center for Aging and Dementia of Mercy. She was also her husband's caregiver for 12 years. He was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's at the age of 56. And now we're going to talk about caregiver resources. I also want to bring Michael Wagler into the conversation. He is Iowa State Director of the AARP. Hello, Michael.
Hi, Charity. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much for being here. And I also want to invite you to join the conversation. So many people are caregivers and are caring for those with dementia. You are welcome to join the conversation with your questions or your stories. You can tell us what has been the most useful thing for you to learn. You can send email to talkofiowa@iowapublicradio.org. And Michael, you were on the show not long ago. We were also talking about caregivers that day. And you shared with me that you also have a personal journey with Alzheimer's. Can you just briefly tell me about your experience?
Yeah, on top of working with Iowa's 50-plus population through my work with AARP, I also have personal experience with the caregiving journey with both of my parents having different forms of dementia. My father has vascular dementia, and my mom has Alzheimer's. So we're going on, much of the same journey that Kathy talked about, and I'm so grateful to be on with Kathy again, because Kathy is both professionally and personally, she's been a really great mentor for me in the journey, and so many of her points that I've incorporated into my caregiving journey, and that idea of that ambiguous loss has been a big part of our journey of, as my parents' dementia journey goes on at different paces. We're constantly finding points of joy where we can celebrate, the connection and the time we have together. But my journey does fall in line with a lot of the stereotypes of, the challenges that align with caregiving, of balancing work and family caregiving, also having 2 teenage kids and a family to care for as well. So balancing all of that has been a big part of my life, but it's also been a big part of my learning journey as I connect with caregivers across the state through my professional life.
Well, and last time you were on the show, we were talking about being a member of the sandwich generation, which you definitely are, Michael.
Right there, yep.
So none of us plan to be caregivers, or at least most of us don't. I guess some people know that something is coming in their partner's life or in a child's life, something like that. But for most of us, and for you, Kathy, I mean, this struck from out of the blue. You were probably thinking maybe you would take care of Dave in 20 years, or he would be taking care of you. It is kind of like a lightning bolt for a lot of people. And Kathy, I know that you have dedicated this part of your career to putting together the resources for people who become caregivers. But I'm curious, when you suddenly became a caregiver, did you know where to turn? I mean, you were a social worker. You had some skills, but where did you look for help?
This is a story that I've told many times about the day that Dave was diagnosed. And it was at the University of Iowa, and I'd been at the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics a lot of times. And so my immediate thought was, okay, well, we have to find the social service office because they'll know what to tell me to do. Okay. And so I'm crying, and Dave is, I think, kind of in shock, and I'm kind of, pulling him along, crying through the halls, stopping people because I couldn't figure out where were we, where should I go? Where do I turn? Saying, do you know where the social services office is? And finally got there and then had to wait. And it was like, oh my goodness, I just needed to talk with somebody. And I'm sorry to say that the person that I talked to didn't get that I needed immediate help and started talking about long-term care placement. I'm going like, no, I just need to know, like, what do I need to do next? And so finally it occurred to me, oh, I'll go to our friend's house. That's what we're going to do. Come on, Dave, we're going to the Robinsons' house. And so, but it was a total shock. Well, then, of course, you kind of get over that initial day, but then it was trying to figure out, like, who do we tell and what services are available, and trying to figure out, like, well, what do we need? So we needed some in-home care eventually. We needed some adult day eventually, so putting all of those together. But it is an arduous task to figure that out, and especially then because there weren't a proliferation of services.
Right. Well, we will talk more with both of you about where people can turn for resources today. Getting services is still a challenge. With me today is Kathy Good, Senior Director and co-founder of the Chris and Suzy DeWolf Family Innovation Center for Aging and Dementia of Mercy, and Michael Wagler, Iowa State Director of the AARP. This is Talk of Iowa from IPR News. You're listening to an archive edition of Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. Today we are talking about the resources that caregivers who care for those with dementia and Alzheimer's, which of course is a form of dementia, need. With me are two people who are dedicated to providing resources. Kathy Good is here. She is Senior Director and co-founder of the Chris and Suzy DeWolf Family Innovation Center for Aging and Dementia of Mercy. Michael Wagler is here, Iowa State Director of the AARP. And you are welcome to join the conversation. You can call with your questions, with your experiences. You can send email to talkofiowa@iowapublicradio.org. And before the break, Kathy, we were talking about that overwhelming moment when you get the diagnosis, and in your case, you needed immediate support because this was a life-changing, instantly life-changing diagnosis. For other people, this may be more of a gradual decline, and you sort of slide into that caregiving role before you even realize what you're doing. So many partners, spouses, wind up caring for their loved ones in retirement, in their, years where they may have more time than you did at that moment. But for people who get that diagnosis, get that Alzheimer's diagnosis, I would love for each of you really to talk about first steps, because it's overwhelming. There are so many things. You may need to take over all of the household bill paying. You may need to find somebody who can clean your house. You may need to find, there are so many different steps. And Michael, I'll let you go first, and then Kathy. But for people who are looking for that first stop, what do you recommend? Where do you turn to begin this journey?
Yeah, I think you make a good point that everyone's caregiving journey is very differently, and oftentimes, as you accurately commented, it starts differently and starts incremental. And Kathy, I think you actually told me this the first time, and it's that idea that we start off as care partners before we move into that true role of a caregiver. But it's in that kind of pre-caregiving role that if you could start to gain knowledge and access and of the resources that are available, it starts to empower you when you need those resources. AARP and AARP Iowa both have really great caregiving resource guides. They're downloadable documents that give you starting points. They're not all of the answers, but they're going to give you a good starting point for that journey. The other resources that no matter where you live here in Iowa or across the country is the area agencies on aging. Are all points of entry, if you will, into caregiving and resources about aging realities. And then we're really excited at AARP to partner with United Way on expanding the 211 call program. into a caregiving hotline. So if you are here in Iowa, you could call 211, and that could be really a good first starting point, a gateway into resources that may exist. Everything from resources that exist in your community, or maybe even larger resources like the Family Innovation Center or the SOME Center at the University of Iowa that really start to be grounding points for all of the more nitty-gritty conversation that we could talk about here in a moment.
Well, and Kathy, obviously, your center is in Cedar Rapids, and the SOME Center is based in Iowa City. But these are resources that anybody in the state of Iowa can take advantage of to some degree, right?
Yes. The Family Caregiver Center that is located within the DeWolf Innovation Center has no geographic boundaries. And so anybody throughout the state and the Midwest can call for individual consultation with our staff, an individual session where you talk about what your needs are, or have somebody help you define those needs, talk about resources, provide you emotional support. And so it's a phone call away, and we can set up a telephone call or a Zoom call, or you can come to the center. So that's available to anybody, and there's no cost. So it's an ongoing resource. And, of course, we're connected with all of the resources that Michael just talked about,
right,
that we utilize those because those are available throughout the state.
And, Kathy, you handed me a binder that you give to people who are on their caregiving journey. And it's the most comprehensive, helpful thing that I have seen, because it walks you through the things that maybe you wouldn't think about. So tell me a little bit about that binder and what it gives people.
So it's our comprehensive guide for caregivers, and it is our attempt to help caregivers think through all of the legal, financial information about their person that they're caring for. So it's putting together a contingency plan in case something happens to you, what's going to happen to your person.
And so many caregivers do pass away before the person that they're caring for.
Sadly to say, yes. And you need to just be prepared. Probably the comprehensive guide, as we were talking earlier, probably would be good for everybody to fill out. It doesn't just,
absolutely. I was looking up and I thought my husband and I should fill this out. We're in our early 50s, but we should have this information available for each other.
Yes, exactly. But it's especially important. And it came out of my feeling in the beginning when we started the Caregiver Center, of saying you need to get that contingency plan together, and you certainly need to get powers of attorney in place while you still can, so the earlier you can do that, the better off you are. However,
because if the person, especially with dementia, if the person that you're caring for still has the ability to understand a legal document and sign a piece of paper, that's so vital.
And it's so empowering to them, too. Plus, then you have an opportunity to talk about what's important to them in this whole process, because what you know is dementia is a terminal condition. So they're going to die. Probably they're going to die sooner than their caregiver. However, you don't know that either.
And I want to ask you, because this is so important, even if you have power of medical attorney, you have your power of attorney, you get the technical things taken care of. When a person dies, let's say I'm caring for one of my parents. When a person dies, my power of medical attorney expires, right, Kathy? I mean, that's something I think a lot of people don't know.
Yes, I think that is correct.
And so it immediately goes to next of kin. So let's say I'm caring for my mother. Suddenly my dad is responsible for things that I had been taking care of upon her death.
Yes, and so one of the things that happens, so not only do we have this comprehensive guide, but we have a series that people come to where we have an attorney present at one of those sessions, so that you can figure out in your situation, how do you take care of that? How do you take care of that? What do you need to do now so that when that happens, things are available for you to make it easier? The whole point of the guide is to make things easier and to get them spelled out ahead of time with the person who is living with dementia as involved as they can be.
And Michael, that's something the AARP helps with as well, because dealing with legal documents is really the last thing people want to do when suddenly they have a traumatic diagnosis in their family, right?
It is. Personally and professionally, I agree with everything that Kathy just talked about. And getting those done sooner rather than later is an important piece, and building a relationship with a family attorney or whatever that relationship looks like in your family is important. And AARP, like many other places, has care guide templates that could walk you through some of those important decisions. And one of the things I've really appreciated about getting more involved with the caregiving network here in the state of Iowa is it is really no wrong door policies. So no matter if you come through the Alzheimer's Association, a AAA, through a hospital-based resource, everyone connects into the same ecosystem and works together to really create that network of resource, which I think something that we've talked a little bit about on the edges is once you self-identify as a caregiver, once you get into the realities of some of the real challenges that caregivers come into, especially as they relate to mental health and physical health and workforce challenges, some of the best kind of support resources that's out there is having the courage to join a support group, and whether that's a formal support group with an organization in your community or creating your own. And that's really what I've done is, with friends that are in similar situations, we've kind of created a commiseration group that we are able to learn from each other, because there's books, there's binders, there's websites, but sometimes learning from someone else who has gone through it really creates that human reality and that human relationship with the caregiving journey.
Well, and Michael, I mean, if we are fortunate, we are part of a caregiving team, where a person's spouse may be their primary caregiver. Obviously, you are taking care of your parents as an adult child, but many people, it's the spouse and the adult child. Kathy, I know you were in that position as well. So it's not just looking to others for mental health support, but is it also building that network, Michael, where you have other people who are able to help with the important tasks that you need to do?
Absolutely. And that's part of that caregiving plan. And in my personal situation, my sister and I tag team that. I'm living this life right now, as my father went to the emergency room last night for some complications and is still in the hospital. And I'll be going to the hospital after this to visit him. But it's that reality that my skill set relies more on the financial side of things and managing some of those kind of business side of the life. And my sister has medical background. So we've been able to kind of bifurcate our roles and responsibilities. And it does create not only a commiseration team that my sister and I can talk together about some of these challenges internally about this process. And like Kathy talked about, it's, joining someone in that grief as that ambiguous loss, that long goodbye continues to happen. But the other side is it allows me a little bit of respite when there are, medical terms being thrown out that I may not understand. I know that my sister has that, and vice versa on the financial side, and making sure that they are financially secure into the future and protecting my parents from fraud and a lot of the other realities that come into this conversation. Having that team, it truly comes into taking a village, not only to raise kids, but to care for our loved ones as they age.
Well, and Kathy, you said something that I've heard other people say, but I think it's worth repeating, and that is that if you've seen one case of dementia, you've seen one case of dementia. I mean, every person's journey is different. You talked about Dave's personality changes. Right. Personality changes are a big part of dementia for a lot of people. And it can be particularly heartbreaking when someone who has always been kind and supportive is suddenly argumentative or even emotionally abusive. And there are a lot of different stressors that people go through. Obviously, that's a stressor for the person who's suffering from the illness, but also for their caregivers.
Right. Exactly. I can remember. So Dave was a very outgoing person, and it was very interesting to watch some of his friends who then kind of disappeared. And when I couldn't figure out why they disappeared, and then I realized that Dave was the glue that made some of those relationships work, because he was a connector. He could reach out. Well, when he couldn't reach out any longer, then some of those people went away, not because they didn't like him, but I'm sure they didn't know what to do either. Right.
Well, and some people, when a person has forgotten who they are, they don't show up anymore, which is understandable, but that means your social safety net is also disintegrating.
Yes, exactly.
So we only have a few minutes left, and we've covered the fact that you can turn to the AARP, you can turn to the DeWolf Family Innovation Center for Aging and Dementia, you can turn to the area agencies on aging, you can turn to the Some Center. There are places where you can get guidance. But for so many people, again, 1 in 10 people over the age of 65 will have dementia or do have dementia. So many of us are caregivers. I would love just some general advice from each of you as we leave today. Some of the things that you have found or that you have seen really work for other people, some of the most important things that you think people need to remember. Michael, what is top of mind for you?
To me, I think what comes into my personal situation and when I talk to others is that constant reminder to find ways to take care of yourself. It is so easy to fall into everything that goes into caregiving, and it can be intense at moments. But, as simple as remembering to eat meals, healthy meals, or to get exercise or take moments to yourself, whatever that may look like, of sneaking away to a movie or going on a bike ride. But that remembrance of finding ways to take care of yourself, both mental and physical, is an important piece. And, in aging, we oftentimes talk about social isolation. And that is a conversation related to aging. It's a conversation related to all of us. But caregiving can be a very isolating reality. And so just remembering to find ways to take care of yourself is such an important piece of advice on top of what we've been talking about here. And part of that is just sometimes being forgiving of yourself that, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to come across things, that you don't understand, and it's important and okay. And like Kathy said, you have permission to reach out for help, whether that be externally or internally within your circles. To me, that's the kind of personal piece of advice. The bigger picture as we think about policies and we think about this as a larger topic, noting, like you said, 1 in 10 are going to have dementia, and we're going to look at, 20% of our population plus being caregivers at some point, and looking at all of that tying together into how our communities are designed to be supportive of this caregiving model, and communities are designed to be built for us to stay vibrant and stay healthy and be active. To me, I think we could have an entirely different conversation to be additive to this about livable communities and how housing policy comes into play related to this, and how we could look at these age-friendly principles and practices and how they tie to our elected officials' conversations.
There are a lot of things we could do to make aging better in this country. Kathy, we only have a minute left. So what would you like to leave people with?
I would like to suggest that one of the things that every caregiver has under their control is to remember to breathe. Okay, because whenever you get in a situation where you can find yourself in a panic or your anxiety rising, if you can just take a moment to do some deep breathing, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, and it sounds crazy, but sometimes then that allows you to be able to regain a perspective that you've lost, and to also remember that you have to continue your own identity, because you don't want two people's identity to be lost dealing with something like dementia.
Kathy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Michael, thank you.
Thank you.
Michael Wagler is the Iowa State Director of the AARP. Kathy Good is Senior Director and co-founder of the Chris and Suzy DeWolf Family Innovation Center for Aging and Dementia of Mercy. Both organizations have a great deal of resources available for caregivers. This is Talk of Iowa. I'm Charity Nebbe.